Without further ado, I am going to introduce you to my friend and amazing master sommelier, David Keck. David, well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about him and then let him introduce himself. But he is an opera singer turned master sommelier, and in the last 10 years has gone from owning restaurants, honky tonks in Texas to now living in Vermont. So, David, tell us a little bit more about where you are today and what are you doing?
Yeah, hi everyone. I am in the very famous Cambridge, Vermont, which is a town of about 3,000 people in northern Vermont, just north of Smuggler's Notch Resort, which is on the quiet and hip side of Mount Mansfield. The other side is Stowe, Vermont, which you've probably heard of. That's where tourists hang out. And I'm staring outside at a very rainy spring day, which is unfortunate because we have about 14 acres now planted of grapevines here, and everything budded out about 2 weeks ago. And so the last thing we need is actually a bunch of rain, but that's farming in Vermont. So there you go. Yeah, very excited to do some blind tasting with everyone. I don't get to do this as frequently as I did when I was sort of mentoring sommeliers on the restaurant floor. So it's a blast to actually get to see Li Meng and to have wines shipped to me in the woods. It's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. And David will tell us more about winemaking and his wine brand a little later, but very much into now. We have a full house. We're going to get straight to wine number one. I'm going to open mine. I broke the cardinal rule. I tell everyone to open for 15 minutes before, but David, I'm going to let you talk
All
and
right.
start off.
Great. A couple of things really quickly before diving into the first wine. I just like to sort of um, broach a couple of topics in blind tasting, one of which is to taste the wine. Um, we frequently, and I obviously went through the path for the quartermaster sommeliers, but I'm a big subscriber to WSET and to basically any other method behind your tasting. I think that tasting without a method is fine as well for fun, but it helps to have structure in blind tasting. I'll never forget I was competing in sommelier competition, and we were told that we didn't need to use the grid that we work with for the quartermaster sommeliers. And after about 2 minutes of fumbling around trying to sort of work my way through a wine without any structure, I realized that I was completely lost and went back and started over with the grid. Which was successful for me. I encourage you to taste the wine however you taste, but I also think that it's easy to get siloed in your thinking and be so determined that you need to discover what the wine is within the context of the wines that you know it could be. So I'd encourage you to branch out a little bit in your thinking. Most of these are classic. The first wine, super bright, and definitely sort of, I would say straw in color, but there are definitely hints of green, indicating some youth to the wine, or picking early, both of which could lend itself to that sort of flecks of green, but definitely kind of a bright straw color. Um, not It's kind of sheeting down the glass, not a huge amount of surface tension there. So probably a lower alcohol wine potentially. Certainly not a high alcohol wine, and probably not a lot of residual sugar. So on the nose, the wine to me is super clean. It's kind of squeaky clean actually. There's no faults that I can pick out, but it's also like really pretty linear in the aromatic intensity. I think it's at least moderate plus intensity of aroma. Um, Leaning into high, it does come out of the glass at me a little bit. Um,
Mhm.
all of the fruit, I like to talk a lot about fruit quality, because I think it tells me more than the actual fruit themselves most of the time is what is the character of the fruit. And here I think it's pretty underripe and tart, a lot of it. I don't get a lot of tropical fruit. It's definitely more in the sort of lemons, limes, underripe apples. I live in a cold climate. Most of the fruit we grow here are pretty tart. So apples from Vermont, not apples from Texas. Um, Definitely all kind of lean. And I get, there are certain folks who don't like to talk about a petrol character or a sort of chemical note to the wine, but it's certainly there for me. Not everybody picks up on this. Actually, I see Jerry's in the room. Jerry and I've talked about TDN before, which is the chemical compound causing some petrol, but I do get a touch of petrol chemical character. I think the wine's herbal without being herbaceous. I think there's an important distinction between those two for me because an herbal wine for me is more sort of sage, rosemary, herbs that you'd find near the Mediterranean, as opposed to herbaceous, where it's actually like green, sort of bell pepper, jalapeno, cut grass, parsley. Those things fall in the herbaceous category for me. If that terminology, if that verbiage doesn't work for you, then great. Find the things that are successful for you. I find the distinction between those two is really helpful. Um, I don't get any oak on this wine at all. I think it's just clean stainless steel, and I'd say either inert vessel as opposed to oak, but here I think it's actually stainless steel. It tastes a little bit kind of like tightly bound, if that makes sense. It might not. We're leaning a little bit into like art versus science here, but to me, the wine is kind of, it's got a tension to it that speaks to a completely inert inox um, environment. Let's taste the wine. So look, super clean, as I said, on the nose, and it's definitely there on the palate. First thing that I get is the acidity. Um, when we're talking about what are if you're looking at the questions that are popped up there, what are the most compelling non fruit characteristics to this wine? I think that petrol character is there, that herbal character is there, but then the acidity here is aggressive. Gets me right back here. We have acid receptors over our entire palate, but it really reads most intensely there. Um, it's very linear, and I think we need to talk about acidity not just as a is it high, is it medium, is it low. This to me is very linear acidity. It's very sort of pointed and focused and kind of racy acidity. You can have some wines that are a little bit richer, a little bit broader, that still have a higher level of acidity, and it doesn't read like this. To me, this wine, on the nose, it's kind of here, and on the palate, it just goes even more lean and focused and driven. I think it on the palate, I'm not getting any oak either. I think it all kind of confirms the character of that fruit, that lemon zest, lime zest, really kind of lean, high toned, white flowers, and all of those elements. Um, so, so let's talk about what this wine might maybe be.
Yeah, so here are your choices, guys, and you're taking a long time to look at this poll that I could see. I want to remind everyone, it is anonymous. You do not need to worry that David and I are going to see what you said. And if you think it's something else that is not on this list, don't be shy to just put it in the chat, and it'll be a good sort of education moment for us all to understand why it's not that other that you're looking at. It would be very helpful for us to see that someone's picked an other. So if you want to step up and tell us what other you are thinking of, that would be really helpful. And what did people think of this wine? At the end of the day, Dave and I were just talking about it. You got to like the stuff. So did you enjoy this wine?
I like this wine. I think this is pretty delicious. It's a great place to start too, depending. I don't to David Simpson in the comments. I do not actually get any residual sugar in this wine.
Mm,
This is dry.
mhm.
Um, and to Jerry's, I cannot detect petrol, so I went. So petrol, I said that I get the petrol here on the nose, and I get it a bit on the palate. It is a kind of like pyrazines, that bell pepper character, or there are a number of different sort of chemical elements, compounds that can present themselves in wines, and everybody is different as far as their level of perception. I think if you don't get the petrol here, which I do, and it leads me to certain conclusions about the wine, there are other things that take it to to the wine that it is as well. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we reveal what it
Yeah.
is.
David, I caught the petrol right when I poured the wine, like right when
Hmm.
I put my nose straight in. So if you still have wine
Yeah.
left, I wonder if you want to top it off and put your nose in. And I really get that. And then it kind of just dissipates as I swirl. I don't know if that's possible.
I think it's super helpful. And I'm trying to remember who it was. When I was studying for my MS exam, a mentor and somebody I tasted with regularly back then said, and I feel like it might have been Devin Broglie, was like, stop swirling. You're swirling the hell out of the wine. Just stop it. Like, put the wine down, let it chill, and now stick your nose in after it's taken in a moment. And it smells different. You notice different things. And
Mhm.
I'm not saying that that's always I'm not saying you're always going to pick up something that's helpful, but it does provide you more
Some difference.
information.
What about
There,
lees over here? Do you see
I
lees
saw. Okay,
characteristics?
I think there's a little bit. I get a little bit that creamy Lee's character. I don't think it's driving the wine though.
Mhm.
Um, it's not enough that I didn't bring it up in the as we sort of tasted through. Um, but I don't think you're wrong in picking some up there, which is not uncommon in a huge broad spectrum of white wines.
So we're gonna take a look at the results. I will say only 90% participated, which disappoints me on wine number one, guys. I'm gonna see better than that participation in the next one. Um, so David, you've got some work cut out for you because I think about 65% of folks went with Old World and
Hmm.
37% went with New World, with Australia or California. So
Right.
what do you feel is defining it to be old world or new world? And I can reveal if you're interested in me moving to reveal.
Yeah. So this is a challenging wine in this sense. Dry Riesling, there's just a broad spectrum of dry Riesling everywhere from, and in the classic, the wines that we would even consider testable, you've got Alsatian Riesling, Austrian Riesling, German Riesling, and Australian Riesling. Beyond that, I can't think of anything, and I hope I'm not missing anything because I don't do this as much
That's
anymore.
testable, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, that's testable, and so they vary a lot, and it is frequently a point of like that. This is an element. This is a world of wines that we need to taste a lot because they do separate themselves, but very differently, and it becomes quite personal because there's so much diversity from producer to producer.
Mhm.
So, why is this Australian Riesling instead of French or German? And I'd throw Austrian in that category. And the reason for me is that it is so aggressively lean. And the a colleague of mine likes to say that it's like drinking a margarita without any simple syrup in the recipe. It's just like tequila and lime juice. And it's really, really lime driven. For me to start leaning into, and this is where, and I see David's comment here, the tart fruit quality, and also Marshall's comment about the acid structure, those and hitting the tip of the tongue. It's really unique to these wines that they're like very low alcohol while simultaneously having this screaming high acid that's really very pointed and really aggressive. And so if this were German, it would have a lot more weight and it would have more alcohol. It would just have more density to it, both on the nose and on the palate, and it would have a lot less of that kind of bright, intense lime juice characteristic. Um, Same thing for French, like an Alsatian Riesling. Also, Alsatian Rieslings, I realize this becomes very personal until you kind of wrap your head around it. But a lot of people talk about or Alsatian wines in general being kind of oily, and there is an oily texture to Alsatian wines while also having that certain density and concentration. I think the closest of the old world wines, honestly, to Australian is, and it's not helpful that they sound similar. Little
Mhm.
Dumb and Dumber reference. It's Austria, not Australia. But
Okay.
Austrian Riesling tends to be a little bit lighter. For me, a little more high toned, a little more filigreed than the German and French counterparts when you get into like Grosses Gewächs style German dry Rieslings and Alsatian Grand Cru Rieslings. Those have such density. Um,
Yeah.
so here, gunmetal, which is, I think, Hewitson does a beautiful job. This is from
Yeah.
Eden Valley, so sort of higher altitude. But I saw Jerry talking about Pusey Vale. Pusey Vale, I think, is another iconic Eden Valley Riesling. Tends to be even more sort of pointed and aggressive in that presence of tridimethylnaphthalene, but TDN or petrol character, where Hewitson I think is picking a little bit riper. It's got a little more breadth, but it's still like super lean and mean. And these are such sommelier wines. Um,
Yeah. I
yeah,
feel like Jerry got into your head. So David wanted the Pusey Veil was what he asked me to buy. And so Jerry, you called it in that sense, in thought. But the vintage was not available yet from Winebow, so we did not get that wine in. So we got the gunmetal. And I like Bill's comment here that gunmetal is appropriate for this wine. It's certainly very clean. And I just wanted David, Bill's comment is really interesting here that he picked Australia by elimination. And I think that's a lot of blind tasting. You have to
yeah,
eliminate.
absolutely. No, I love that comment because it speaks to Jerry's comment as well about, well, I went with Shannon because I didn't get petrol. And I think it's really important when we're blind tasting to, it's probably one of the greatest downfalls. And I'll never forget, I did this in my master sommelier exam when I was tasting a really beautiful bottle of Right Bank Bordeaux. And I was so determined that it wasn't Bordeaux because I wasn't getting a lot of pyrazines on it. And it was a pretty ripe Merlot driven wine. And it didn't have pyrazines that I was getting. And I was just like, it can't be that, even though everything else structurally said that that's what it was. And I went totally the wrong direction. And here, if you're not getting petrol, that doesn't mean it's not Riesling necessarily. It's kind of like Sauvignon Blanc. A lot of Sancerre right now is not pyrazinic. You're not getting a lot of bell pepper, and that's because they're riper vintages. People are picking later, and you're not getting as aggressive a pyrazine character. And so it's really easy to be like, it's not Sancerre because it doesn't taste like pyrazines. And it's like, well, structurally it's on point. Flavor profile, other than that one thing, it's on point. And that's the case with this Riesling for
Mhm.
sure. It is, even if you don't get the petrol, it's like lime juice, it's low alcohol, it's high acid, and there's nothing else in the world that it really could be.
Mhm.
Chenin Blanc would be broader. It would have more bruised fruit character. Like for me, the Chenin Riesling thing, especially when you get into off-dry wines, is always conflicting, especially when people make really clean Chenin. But for me, Chenin's kind of dirty frequently. It's not as pristine as Riesling, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I love Chenin. I would drink Chenin over Riesling, honestly, most of the time. But that's
Yeah.
because I like that weird sort of funkier character. So,
Yeah.
um,
So I love this
but
picture. He's got a really interesting thief there for his barrel.
yeah, that's
But
crazy.
all right. So I think we're ready for wine number two.
Let's do it. Um, so this wine has a bit more color, definitely leaning out of straw and into yellow. And it stays pretty consistent right to the rim. It doesn't, it's showing maybe a little bit of color variation, indicating a bit of age, but not, excuse me, not dramatically. It's bright. Surface tension, I think there's mostly sheeting, although it's a bit, there's a bit sort of a slower, more widely spaced tier than what we were seeing on the previous wine. So maybe a little bit more viscosity there, a little more surface tension. On the nose, the wine's clean, but not like squeaky clean. It's got a little bit of oxidative character to it. The fruit here for me is ripe. Um, and even just a little bit overripe. It's kind of like the fruit, like the apple fell off the tree and got bruised a little bit. Um, it's a lot of yellow fruit. I don't always say like a lot of like golden delicious apple, Bosque pear, like a lot of orchard fruit and kind of bruised orchard fruit for sure. Again, it's definitely in an herbal, not an herbaceous place overall. It's kind of floral, but sort of yellow flowers. I usually Listen, when I was sitting exams, I sat in the florist section a lot and got a lot more flower names dialed in. I don't do that as much anymore. I'm pretty good with colors. So I think it's very yellow, sort of floral character. It's not like intense gardenia blossoms or anything like that. Um, there is there's like the touch of oxidation. There is a little smoky character to it. I don't think that it's a element of oak. I think it's just sort of like maybe a large oxidative vessel. Um, there's a honeyed character to the wine for sure. A little like ginger. All of that making me think there's some botrytis here. So a little like late harvest botrytis character. Yeah. Oh, Dave Simpson, nice work. Yeah, totally. Um, let's taste wine. So on the palate, not 100% what I was expecting. Still clean, but it's bone dry. It has that slight um, oxidative character, bruised fruit, bruised. It's like a bruised golden delicious apple. Like you drop the golden delicious apple, you put it in the bag, you got it home, and then you're like, oh, it's a little messed up. Not in a way that's unpleasant, but it's a bruised fruit character. The honey is really, I think, present on the palate as well. That's the thing that on the nose made me really expect it to be off dry, and then it's not. I like the bread dough call, Kevin. There's definitely a leesy character, and it's a lot more present on the palate than it was. I wasn't getting it a lot on the nose, but that also sort of lends itself to a sort of larger oxidative vessel, some lees stirring, a little bit of working of the wine, um, but but overall like clean and dry. The acidity is still high. This is not a big step down from the Riesling that we just tasted, which is a pretty key component. But it is a little broader, and there's more alcohol on the palate. There's like if you let the air kind of fall out of your mouth, this is what helps me is as far as feeling a little bit of heat on the back of the palate. Everybody reads alcohol differently. I love teaching bartenders. They're always like, slow alcohol, slow alcohol, slow alcohol. I'm like, well, compared to the whiskey that you were tasting a minute ago, yes, it is in fact low alcohol. But here, definitely a little heat and a little burn to the wine. Um, so I think addressing the questions here, um, I don't I don't think this wine is highly aromatic, and it is helpful to keep these two wines going together and smell wine number one. Don't swirl it, just smell it and see how much it sort of jumps out of the glass at you, and then smell wine number two. And I think the level of aromatic intensity is very different in the two wines. Hopefully, you all agree with that, but that's my sense of it. And and I think from a non-fruit perspective, which is really well, it's both the quality of the fruit I think that drives this wine, but then also some of the non-fruit, including that honeyed character. There's like chamomile tea. I said herbal, and I kind of get that like chamomile tea, dried bay leaf. Um, Presence really drives the wine. And Bill, that's awesome. Yeah,
I was
that you
just
got
gonna
the
say what Bill
um,
said. I feel like the petrol's so
yeah,
much more obvious now when you go back to number
yeah.
one. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think tasting them side by side, you see that both wines can have a super high acidity that reads really differently on the palate. If
Mhm.
you're wondering whether it's high acidity, one of the little, well, parlor tricks, but it's also kind of valid, is just think about tasting the wine again. And does your mouth start watering? Because mine does. It's like your mouth saying, "Oh, I know where this is going." I've got a border collie standing here with a toy. She's like, "Hey, what about me?" Um, but when I look at wine too, my mouth starts watering. It's like, oh, here we go again. Like you're about to hit me with some acidity. Um, and I like the that the acidity structure is in the center of the palate. It is less like aggressively like I taste that Australian Riesling and it's like zing right in the back. Like it's like you've been smiling too long. Where I think The second wine, it's a little bit more nice. Everybody's chiming in with the dogs. You bring your dog in, and it's immediately like, um, nice. Uh, Wine number two, it doesn't attack the back of my mouth in the same way with those acid receptors. It's a little bit softer,
Yeah.
but it's no less intense for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Do you get any bitterness on wine number two?
A little bit,
Mm.
a little bit. But bitterness for me, I'm not saying it's a blind spot, but I tend to get bitterness in just about all wines. So
Mm.
yeah, like not to give anything away, this is not Gewürztraminer. Like Gewürztraminer, and when you get into like highly aromatic varieties that have a lot of terpenic character, I get like when it gets into that level of bitterness, I'm like, okay, that's more than I expected. But here, um, there's definitely a little bit of that bitter character on the back of the tongue.
Mhm.
Um, Jerry, that aroma that makes you think moldy is that slightly like oxidative bruised thing, or wet wool is definitely a lanolin. People love to say lanolin, and I'm always like, when's the last time you smelled lanolin? But I live out in Vermont, and a number of my colleagues farm sheep, and so I can say with some validity that yeah, there's a little bit of a wet wool. Um, I have also not tasted lanolin, but I've smelled it a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a phenolic bitterness. It's just not an aggressive one. I think there's definitely a phenolic intensity to the wine, which I like. I think it gives it some nice complexity.
I have to say, I loved Kevin's Brett Dowie comment. And to your point about cleanliness, it just feels a little bit more muddied in uh
Yeah,
in in that second wine.
yeah, for sure. And just knowing the producer, it's not because they're working in a not clean way, right? Like this is a very clean example of what this is.
Mm, mhm.
Um,
Cool.
yeah,
All right, folks, I'm expecting
quiz.
like big time participation here. Let's see if you guys see the poll and hopefully you're filling it out. I'm gonna give you guys like, I don't know, 10 more seconds and see if folks, again, it's anonymous, so definitely go in there, get in there. You'll only learn if you put yourself out there. So, and take a stake in the ground, if you will.
I love getting. I've learned so much more from wines that I've gotten incorrect in the past than the ones that I've just nailed. It feels good to nail a wine. I mean, there's a great like crushed it sort of sensibility, but I'll never forget I did a blind tasting 1 month before I eventually passed my master sommelier diploma exams, and I got 1 for 6 of the wines correct. But it was like every other wine, I knew exactly why I had gotten it incorrect, um, and it was perfect. Like it was a great educational tasting. I was like, I got that wrong because I just have been thinking about this the wrong way, and it really helped me recalibrate a lot.
Yeah.
And then a month later, it worked out for me. So great.
There you go. If you have an other here, please let us know what you think. That's a good question. As we finish up the poll here, folks are asking, Kevin's asking, would you age number two any further?
I don't know that I would, but I don't think it's actually going to disintegrate or break down that much more. Like I think that this wine is in a good place right now. Um, it's dry, but it has high acid. I think that it really, for me, depends on how much you like older wines.
Mm,
And I know some people who love a wine that has a lot of fruit development and really moves into that tertiary stage. And um, good friend and colleague of mine, Keith Goldston, used to say, is the fruit on the tree or is it on the ground where you smell the other stuff or is it like disintegrating into the earth? And like I've tasted some really old wines and I'm like, I can appreciate what this wine is doing, but it's pretty old. Like it's getting into a place where it's intellectually curious to me, but it's not pleasurable. I think this wine right now is kind of is in a good place. I think it's moving into the intellectual phase, and I think getting more age, and it's going to accentuate a lot more of those tertiary characters. And so
mhm.
that becomes a matter of taste. I don't think you're going to lose all the fruit, and I don't think the structure's ever going to fall apart. Acidity never goes away. It really
Yeah.
doesn't. So
Great. So you've got 14% of folks here on Chardonnay and
great.
82% on Chenin. And if you look at the regions, I think that people are pretty split. You've got sort of 55% in France, but 45% in the new non-European world. So what do you
Awesome.
think? How would you help folks? Where would you start? Chardonnay versus Chenin.
Yeah, so the Chardonnay versus Chenin is challenging just because Chardonnay, again, it's a process of elimination. Where do they make Chardonnay that would taste like this? I can only think of one place, and that would be Chablis, because there's no obvious oak on the wine, and or maybe the Macon or somewhere further south in Burgundy. There's no obvious oak. It's lean. It's leesy. I think the botrytis is the thing that's challenging for me if I'm going to think Chardonnay. Are there Chardonnays with botrytis on them? Absolutely. Do I want to drink them? Not particularly. And they've thrown me in the past, but I think like I've tasted some great Premier and Grand Cru Chablis that's like, oh, it's great, but there's also some botrytis issues here. Like, and that's just the challenge of the vintage, right? And producers trying to navigate that and whether they're okay with it or not. But I think it becomes a driving force in the wine. But the lees are still the thing that should be outpacing that botrytis character. And for me, this wine is not driven by lees. It is present, but it's not driving it. I think the acidity is high enough that it's hard for me to step away from Chenin or Riesling
Mhm.
because it's Chenin. But it's also the bruised fruit character. So the bruised fruit aspect, the botrytis, and the lack of oak all take me away from the possibility of Chardonnay.
Mhm. And
So
so
where is it from?
we're moving now from Australia. And how would you talk about New World versus Old World on this particular wine? And you're going to see in a second that we're firmly ending up in the Old World here.
Yeah. The the main thing is again, what are you looking for when you're drinking one of the I mean, there are fantastic South African and American or domestic Chenin Blancs. I think domestic Chenin Blanc you're seeing unless it's got a decent amount of age on it, you're not going to see the same kind of oxidative botrytis character. At least I haven't from many producers. The the thing about Chenin from South Africa is there isn't enough consistency from producer to producer to really, for me, develop a style that I can put my finger on. This is South African Chenin Blanc. I mean, you've got Evan Sadi doing some really gorgeous, like rich, concentrated, but they're like 14.5% alcohol. Um, like to Rebecca's point, hey there. Um, Not as much botrytis in South Africa. A lot of the places they're growing are tend to be drier and less botrytis inclined. Um, Also, there's a lot of oak use in Chenin Blanc in South Africa, and this wine doesn't have that. And the oak use in Chenin in South Africa tends to be a bit I'm not going to say aggressive. It's just more overt. It's more present. Chenin shows oak pretty obviously. Bill,
Mhm.
I like that. I think there's definitely an anise character sort of um, falls a
Bill said
little bit in
something
that
about it
spice.
being, is it possible to be Jura, when you were talking about Macron?
Yeah. So, I mean, it wouldn't be Chenin, right? It'd be sort of Sauvignon or a Chardonnay Sauvignon blend, which I think those wines are delicious. Yeah, it would be a stretch, but I think the flavor profile and the acidity levels, like, I think those all. So,
Yeah, you did
Chardonnay,
mean Chardonnay. When you're talking
uh,
about what possible
so
Chardonnay
you
places, yeah.
Yeah, I think the level of oxidation could lend itself to some of what producers are doing in the Jura. I think that usually there's also oak, even if it's neutral. There's a bit more of a oak presence on the wines, especially Chardonnay, in the Jura that at least comes across as a spice character, even if it's not like vanilla.
Mm.
Um, and Chardonnay doesn't from the Jura. It has some of that acidity. It's not quite as pointed, in my opinion. but it's not a terrible parallel, I think, especially because you've got that oxidative element and some of that honeyed character.
Yeah.
Um,
David,
but I
I
think
told,
again,
yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say that like it's easy. It is not always difficult to find some cool and interesting parallels, but also if you're working too hard to make a square peg fit into a round hole, it's probably not that thing. You know,
Mhm.
like if, well, I think it's probably, it tastes a lot like Chenin Blanc, but it could be, it's probably not. It's probably Chenin Blanc. I,
David, will you talk about the mouthfeel a little bit more? Is there's oak on it, and what, or is there not? What is it that's giving it that really awesome filling that this wine has?
I think a dry wine with botrytis has that richness. It has that sort of, and both the richness, there's a almost oily, and I said oily with respect to Alsatian wines, but I don't think it's a out of place here. It's kind of a mouth coating character. Um, and I also think that the alcohol level, and I don't know what the alcohol on the label is
It's
here,
on the
but
label. So for those of you who have the wine and hasn't peeled off ever, you can peel off the little overlay. Obviously, from a trust standpoint, we put the all the information that needs to be on there. And it says 13%, David, but I believe, you can go
mm,
at least 1% more.
okay,
Um,
and it's reading a little bit hotter to me, but I get just a little bit more of that like glycerol texture to it.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
Um,
Excellent. Yeah,
yeah,
I
it's
was
a pretty
telling
wine.
David, sorry, I was just going to tell everyone that I was telling you before you came on that I was very worried about this wine, kind of to Kevin's point, if the oxidative factors would make people think that we did something wrong on the bottling line because it's got age on it and the color is different. And I have to say, the Somm called me over and said, okay, we're tasting this. But I love it. And I feel like we stopped it in its tracks with the screw cap. And it shows exactly when we open the 750, and that oxidative character presents such a different case for this wine than that first wine.
Yeah. No, and if you get a chance to try these wines, like when they're first released as well, um, they're really they're really lovely wines. And this bottling, the spring bottling from Vouvray, is always extremely herbal and really sort of not like cut grassy, but it's got this really sort of almost tarragon character to it. Um, and they're really really lovely. But I think Chenin ages so beautifully because that acidity is so on point. So anyway, I like the wines. They make a really awesome sparkling Chenin as well if you get a chance.
Yeah. All right. So let's go to wine number three.
Awesome.
I'm excited about this wine.
So yeah, me too. Um, so much like wine number two, this one has some color. It's definitely moving from straw into a yellow character. A little bit of rim variation, but not much. It still, to me, looks quite youthful. I don't see that this wine is developing. I think the color is either from grape variety or potentially the élevage. Um, give it a swirl. Yeah, there's some definitely some surface tension. I think there's some alcohol to this wine, or residual sugar, but we'll see. On the nose, it's clean. The first thing that comes out to me, I think the intensity is about medium to medium plus, but I only say that medium plus is really from like there's a the oak on the wine comes out of the glass a little bit more than well, and it may just be in contrast with the previous two wines, but it's definitely a presence. And reeds there. I think the fruit is all very ripe without being overripe. It doesn't have that bruised character that we got in the Chenin. It's more of just sort of bright stone fruit, peach, pear, nice orchard fruit, and all of it just kind of just ripe. I think it's in that yellow fruit category, sort of yellow delicious apple, like Fuji apple, without again without being overblown. The spice character is definitely there. All of it leading me to think there's oak, despite it sort of jumping out. You get that vanilla, you get some cardamom, baking spices. They're all present there, sort of star anise. Um, and the color itself also lends itself to the idea that there is probably an oxidative vessel of some variety here, because I don't think the fruit doesn't smell like it's developing. It still smells quite youthful. So the color's not coming from any sort of lengthy aging process. There's also a little bit of a yogurt, sour cream, kind of leesy character. I think there's definitely some lees work on this wine, sort of ties it to the other two, but I think actually more prominent here. There's also just a bit of a kind of struck flint sulfur reduction character, and I think it'll be interesting. Please feel free to chime in on the chat. I think reduction can be a really challenging thing for people to um, dash into and try and like wrap their heads around. But I think for me, and we can talk a little bit about where reduction comes from when we talk about what the wine is and how it's made. But reduction has to do with breaking down of sulfur. So it's definitely present for me.
It's amazing to me that Three Noses are so different of these three whites. And it's a true study in petrol, oak, no oak. Like you could draw
Yeah,
so many differences between the three wines.
absolutely. And there's such important markers, right? Like the presence of oak immediately makes your world small
Hmm.
with respect to the wines in the world that see oak at all, white wines specifically. Let's taste it.
I don't know if everybody else got that reference until you said it. That sour cream yogurt thing was really helpful. Thank you.
No, it's not always the thing that brings up leaves for me, but it really is in this wine.
Mm.
Thanks, David. I didn't make this wine. I don't need to say thank you. I did help choose it. I think it's delicious as well. I really enjoy this wine. Um, what there are a few things that I think are really particularly delicious about it, and they have to do with the tasting note, right? I think it's dry,
Mm.
obviously, that helps. Um, I think it tastes the way it smells, mostly. I think the fruit on the palate is still ripe, but it's not, but it's like just perfectly ripe. And
Mm.
it's like eating a pear when you get it just right. Anybody a fan of Eddie Izzard, one of my favorite comedians, British comedian? He's like, pears are just like, they just wait. They're hard. They're hard. They're hard. You leave the room for 5 minutes. They're like perfect and ripe. And you come back and they're mush. And I feel like this wine is in that like perfect place of it is just ripe, which means
Mm.
the acidity is right, the sugar is right, which doesn't exist, but like the sugar when it was picked, the alcohol is right. All of those things. We'll come back to it in a second. The oak is present, but I think it actually is less aggressive and involved on the palate than it is on the nose. I think it jumps out on the nose, and maybe again in contrast with the previous two wines, with that the baking spices, a little bit of vanilla, that element of reduction and that sort of sulfuric character. But I think when it gets on the palate, those things disappear, and it really becomes more about the fruit with the oak as a secondary characteristic. I don't get a lot of floral characteristic from this wine. I do get a kind of lifted aromatic quality that I think has to do with the oxidative vessel. I realize that doesn't mean that much, right? Like, what is a lifted floral? I think it's just that aromatic intensity that is less. It's not about the fruit, and it's not about the spice necessarily, but it's kind of a combination of the two that comes out of the glass a little bit more aggressively. I mean, I can find flowers in anything, but I don't think it's driving this wine,
Mm.
um, which I think is an important point for everyone in their tasting. Like you can find something in any glass of wine if you look for it hard enough. The goal in blind tasting is not to do that. It's to find the things that are actually obvious. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and the acidity I think is nice and balanced, not as aggressive as the first two wines, but definitely present, right? The alcohol I think is balanced and right in the middle. Like it doesn't read hot to me, but it doesn't either. It's definitely still got weight and presence to it. Um, and And I think it's got a nice finish. I mean, I think it's a well balanced wine. So
So I put the poll up. Folks can
right.
start to guess it. Would we go back to back on Shannon? Very possibly. So do not discount it for that reason. Lots of places make Shannon in this world. But David, I really enjoyed this wine. I think Bill said it, that it's kind of intertwined, and the oak was so obvious in the nose, but it wasn't sticking out in the palate at all.
Um, no, and I think the Leesy character actually is accentuated on the palate a little bit too. That sour cream note, but it also is a little bit. I get it's not a sugar sweetness, but I get a sweetness on the back of my tongue, like when there's a Lee's character in a wine. It's kind of a personal thing, but it just kind of it reads that way when I drink like a great bottle of Chablis. I get this like bready sweetness. It's like my palate wants gluten with it. Like I want baguette right now.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely present here. And there is that flinty, smoky character.
Mhm, mhm.
Definitely present, and it has to do with reduction, and that's a winemaking aspect. Yeah,
Oh boy, I'm looking at the results coming in. All right, folks, we're at 85% participation. You got 10 seconds or less to get it down to 90%, and then we'll close the poll. But so far, I see that people are split kind of down the middle. Maybe,
great stuff to
on
talk
the,
about.
yeah. So this region thing is difficult on a wine like this.
Remember that. No, I'm not going to say anything. We'll just let the poll go.
Let the poll go. All right.
Yeah,
We're at 100%. Thank you guys for putting your answers in. All right. 85% of you thought that it was Chardonnay, 5% Chenin, and 10% Viognier. And in terms of region, we are at 40% France and 60%, 30-30 apiece to South Africa or New Zealand. Do you
yeah.
want to
This is a hard.
share or do you want to reveal some thoughts?
Let's talk about variety first, and then we'll talk about where. Um, so let's talk about why it's not Chenin. I think again we've got Chenin right next to it. The acidity just isn't high enough, and the presence of oak also lends me to think it's probably not Chenin unless it's South African Chenin, which it could be, or somebody who's just playing around, or somebody in the U.S. Viognier is just more aromatic and really more fruity. Like it's just so the terpenic level and terpenes being that floral character are just much more aggressive, and so it's really only a very reserved bottle of Condrieu or something from France as far as Viognier is concerned. And when I say reserved, I mean like picking early and really not waiting for those terpenes to develop fully for a wine to be Viognier without a lot more aromatic intensity. So I don't think this has that. This is Chardonnay. And I think aromatic intensity again, when I said it was like medium plus, it's medium plus, but it's medium plus driven by winemaking, not by grape variety. Chardonnay by itself, if you ever have the chance to try Chardonnay as just the grape variety, just like juice, drinking it before any winemaking has occurred, it's one of the most uninteresting juices to have. It's really what happens in the winery that drives the final wine for Chardonnay and what helps express that terroir and that sense of place. It's really in the winery, and whether it's lees stirring or oak presence or things that are done there, then you start to see the Chardonnay for the with the place involved. But like the juice itself is not the grape variety is not the expressive part until it's been played with a little bit. Um, so where is this from? This is not from France, but it's 100% made with a French winemaking sensibility, right? The reductive aspect, the things that take me away from France with this wine, and is that balance of the fruit. And I didn't talk a lot about any sort of mineral intensity with this wine. and I realize that I'm very hesitant. I happen to have a wife who's a geologist, so I'm very careful about bringing the discussion of rocks into this in any way, shape, or form. But I do think the previous wine had a bit more of that sort of chalky, mineral-driven character. I don't get a lot of overt minerality with this wine. What I do get is a winemaking technique that speaks to an old world sensibility, but with the fruit characteristic of a more new world growing region, right? Um, yeah, to Bill's point, yeah, Chardonnay from around the world is super difficult. It 100% reminds me of Oregon Chardonnay, and I really liked the New Zealand guest because I think New Zealand Chardonnay is has a lot of similar characteristics.
Mm.
Which is, I mean, New Zealand and Oregon are both areas where a lot of the winemaking technique is of French derivation, right? A lot of the ways that they're working with their fruit have that as a sensibility. And so here, this is a wine made by, actually, it's made by a really interesting person who works with the Molinos as their assistant winemaker and is doing this super cool project to work with younger winemakers. And so Stellenbosch and I think South Africa and New Zealand have a lot in common with respect to what they're doing with Chardonnay, and Oregon falls into that category. All of them planting more and more Chardonnay right now because they're realizing that they have so much success and they have so much potential with this grape variety. And it would be nice for especially New Zealand and Oregon to get out of their monoculture as far as one grape variety really driving that. So the thing that I think drives this wine into France for a lot of people is that element of reduction. So reduction is an anaerobic result of the breakdown of sulfur. So when you think about French winemaking technique, generally speaking, the French are putting Chardonnay with an extensive amount of lees stirring in barrels with a fair amount of sulfur use, right? And then that barrel is topped up and stoppered. And so it's working in it essentially an anaerobic environment with a microoxygenation, right? But that sulfur is breaking down and creating this reductive character as it scavenges oxygen in that environment. And so that reductive sulfuric flinty character to me, it's like when I smell it, it immediately makes me want to dive into like whose Merceau is this, right? Like who is doing this? Because I love that, I love reductive white wines from Burgundy. But what takes me out of there is the way that oak comes in as a little bit more sort of like creamy vanilla character. It's not as reserved as I would expect from a French wine. It's not as austere, I guess. And the fruit is really like very present in the wine, and it's ripe, super ripe, which is really not easy to do in Burgundy in the same way. Um, so Ms. Hendricks is the assistant winemaker to Andrea and Chris Molyneux. If you're familiar with their wines, this project falls under their umbrella, and she's working, I think, with a number of young winemakers coming out of some Stellenbosch winemaker education program, which is super cool, and I think so important. And I'm not talking about politics, but I think it's really important to support this aspect of South African culture and what they're doing to sort of bring more women and underprivileged demographics into the wine world in a super important and cool way, which has been going on for the past 30 years, really 25 years.
Yeah.
Um,
Politics
so
aside, I think what's really cool about Great Heart, and I'm really glad that we bought this, is that this particular winery is employee owned. It's a co-op. So I think that they all have ownership into the winery, which is so different for South Africa historically. So um, a fantastic wine. I really
that's
enjoyed
great.
this one.
I think that the other thing, sorry to dive back into the wine just a little bit more, is it does, and Limang, you brought up texture, and I think there's a glycerol texture and a richness to this wine that's sort of mouth coating It very much speaks to the quality and the richness of the fruit coming into the winery.
Mm.
That kind of mouth coating glycerol aspect takes me into the new world,
Mhm.
more than it would say France.
Yeah, for those who are studying, I have to put my disclaimer out now. That last wine was what we would call a discovery wine. And as I promised in the last two kits, we have six wines in a set, and four wines will be your classics, like the first two wines are testable, certified, as well as advanced Code of Master Sommelier. You know, the W set is a little broader, but those first two wines would be hitting curriculum. The third wine obviously isn't, but David and I were just talking about it. It's important for your mind expansion. And it would have been a shame for us not to put it in just because it's South African Chardonnay. How many do you know to not try something new? So there will always be at least one wine that's kind of quote unquote out there. Thoughts, David?
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it's also um, it's an important wine to just taste without the blinders on, right? It's great to taste something and say, oh, what else could this be? Not knowing what how much of the world that could encompass, right? I'll never forget Emily Wines pulling. I was doing a blind tasting leading up to my MS exam, and I went and tasted with Emily, and she poured me Italian Moscato, and I broke my brain on it. I was like, "This is sweet. It's not Riesling. It's bubbly." And and she was like, David, you're just blind tasting to pass this test. You need to blind taste with the entire world of wine at your disposal. And then you narrow things down. How many Italian Moscatos have you had? And I was like, okay, I've had a lot. I pour it by the glass. Everybody should pour it by the glass because it's delicious. It's candy for adults. And she was like, yeah, you know this wine, but you're so determined that it's going to fall into your category that you're just tasting to pass, like to win. And it was a great eye-opening experience. So it's fun to taste a wine that is outside of that realm of what we would consider possibilities. The next wine also, just looking at it alone, I assume everybody's kind of on board with the fact that this is probably not super classic as far as a testable variety is concerned, or a testable wine is concerned, unless it's the oldest bottle of Merceau available in the cellar. I don't think, but there's no rim variation, so it's probably not that. It's actually pretty constant out to the rim. So um, this is this is not a white wine, nor is it a red wine. It's kind of orangish in color. It's got a little pinkish hue to it, but yeah, it's kind of amber. Consistent out to the rim, I don't think, and I have a little bit of dissolved CO2, which is amazing, even considering the fact that this has been rebottled. So I think there's a certain youthful character. Um, yeah, honey colored, is that what you're saying, Bill? Yeah, I mean, I totally get that, but it's got like this a little pinkish character to it, so maybe like red clover honey. Um, yeah, it looks like kind of medium viscosity or surface tension. I think probably oh, honey on the nose. Yeah, we're not there yet. Um, but I think there's kind of moderate level of surface tension. On the nose, it's clean. It's moderate intensity. It's not jumping out of the glass at me, but it's not. I don't have to search for it too hard. Um, and here, because of the color, I think it's really important to think about the fruit, what fruit it is, a little bit more carefully, because I think there are characteristics here of both red and white wine. I get strawberries. I think that's great, Marshall. I get like a raspberry, all kind of underripe red fruit character, but I also definitely get a like peach pith character and some things that I would normally associate with some white wines. I don't get as much honey bill, but I do think that there's a, of course, because I'm in Vermont, I gotta say like maple syrup, but it does have like there's a sweet character to the fruit that I can't quite pin down. Um, there's a little iron. note to the wine. There's a sort of, I don't know, black crushed earth character. I'm going to digress for 2 seconds on minerality. We taste a lot of wines. This is David's philosophy on minerality because I think it's a really challenging thing. And everybody has a philosophy about it. This is mine. Suffer through it. Is that we taste a lot of wines a with knowledge of what a wine is grown in, right? We taste a bunch of champagne. It's grown in chalk. It's grown in chalk. We're tasting Chablis. It's grown in Cameroon soil. It's grown in Cameroon soil. We taste Sangiovese, it's grown in Albarese, it's grown in Albarese, this calcareous soil. And so, like, we draw these connections with the knowledge of what we're tasting and the type of soil. And I think that, yeah, Tuffeau from Chenin, we taste a bunch of Vouvray, and we're like, oh, it's in Tuffeau, it's in this crazy um, chalky soil. And I think that we create connections between the organoleptic elements of the wine, right? The things that you can sense, an organoleptic thing with our organs, things we can smell and see and taste, and we draw a connection to what we know to be true of the soil in the place where that is grown. And it is a little artistic, but it's not, I don't think it's wrong. I think we create a sense connection. And so what you smell as chalky, I might not smell as chalky, but I do smell, I think champagne smells and tastes like chalk to some extent, but I think it's because of my perception of that wine, knowing having tasted 1,000 of them that they're grown in chalk. So this, I get like a funky black earth minerality, and I think that that's drawing me to different places in the world. Does it make it any less true for you? Maybe, but it's what I get out of the wine. So it's connecting me to places where I've tasted that before. Yeah, I think the idea of native yeast connecting to terroir is really problematic, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, Bill. We can talk offline about it. I just think that there's so much yeast is so very complex.
Sounds like a good topic for the happy half hour.
Hmm.
But
I do
man,
get a
this nose is so unique.
it really is. There's a liqueured character to it, almost an amaro note, like a Montenegro or I don't know, one of the sort of sweeter, more like blood orange driven Amari. Blood
Mm.
orange, also something I get in there. I don't get any oak per se. Nothing obvious. Maybe it's big barrels, but I don't think there's anything driving the wine. Let's taste it. It's bone dry. I use bone dry sparingly. Bone dry for me is a combination of having bright, intense acidity, some element of tannin, and no residual sugar. Those three things kind of get there. Yeah, Kevin, I get the nuttiness as well. I think there's a touch of that. I think there's a leesy character here, which lends itself to a little bit of nuttiness. Um, it does have. I think the fruit is similar, but it's very reserved compared to a lot of those mineral characters. I get blood orange. I get that peach character. I get the strawberry, raspberry. Like I think all the fruit is consistent, um, and it's like ripe and underripe, but I really think it's driven by that kind of like black earth iron note
Mhm.
and like a little bit of kind of an oxidative nuttiness, which I think is like lees and also oxidation to Kevin's point. And yeah, and I think that because I've said lees enough, I feel like a little bit of a like used oak element on the wine would not be surprising. It's not
Mhm.
driving it with any sort of flavor profile, but um, I've got a squeaky toy with a border collie. Hopefully that's not coming through too much. So it's a really interesting wine. It is definitely different than anything else we've tasted thus far and anything that we are going to taste after this. Um, so let you guess.
Yeah, this is a tough one, but I think it's
Mhm.
really enjoyable. And I will say, in defense of typicity, I do think that even though it's unique to us and our palates, this is a variety that is from this region and therefore a classic of the region. So I think that that's an important
Yep.
distinction that we try to make here is our at least one of our wines, if it's not testable, it's not like, a Chardonnay grown in Portugal. It's fake.
Yeah, no, no, no. This is a classic grape grown in a classic region, in my opinion. Not a
There's a question if I could put the poll up again. The poll is up. So if you're not seeing it, just kind of move your cursor around to see if it's hiding behind something. I'm sorry that you're. Oh, did I just give the answer? I don't know. There are multiple things that are from the place that it's from.
yeah.
So all right. Sorry, Ivan, that was too much info. All right, let's see if people get it. All right. I'm gonna end the poll, and I'm sorry if you don't see the poll. I see people participating almost at 100%. So here we go. We have 68% on Norello Mascalese and 11% on Pinot. So maybe process of elimination is important here, and the 21% on Nebbiolo. Very old world. I think the discussion of minerality has led people down to Europe. So 89% on Europe and around 10% in the New World. So what do you think?
So a few things. Pinot Noir is pink. If it's oxidized enough, it'll turn this color. But I think the acidity is the thing that really drives the wine for me. Is that there's bright, beautiful acidity, and there's like this iron backbone to it, with kind of a dark soil component, and it's really mineral driven. And I feel like from a just sort of leaning into the art and less the science aspect. This wine is built to go with food,
Mm.
100%, which to me, it has a little bit of VA or volatile acidity. It's got that Amaro character. It's got a blood orange character. All of that to me speaks to an Italian sensibility. And so then I'm like, okay, but where in Italy do they make wines like this? Um, and I'll get to your question, David, in just a second. And I think that Nebbiolo for me is a little more high toned and lifted and floral, where for me Norello Mascalese is has more sort of earth, and it leans a little bit more into the fruit and less into that sort of aggressive tannic side. Also, Nebbiolo is gonna, no matter whether it's rosé or not, the tannin is going to be a bit more intense and kind of mouth coating, right? For me, Nebbiolo tannin is like I have a few different connections for this, but I think maybe the one that reads most, I found reads most with people is when like the doctor pulls your tongue out with cheesecloth, like a little gauze. The way your tongue feels, that's the way Nebbiolo tannin works. It's like it coats your mouth, but it's really, really fine grained. This has a little bit of tannin to me, but it's more driven by that acidity and kind of a rustic red fruit character. Norello, I think we're seeing more and more really, really beautiful examples of Norello Mascalese. And I think that stylistically, it's really starting to find its home, to the point that I think sommeliers are really saying, it doesn't taste like Nebbiolo. It doesn't taste like Sangiovese. In fact, it doesn't taste like anything else in the world. It does taste like Pinot Noir and Nebbiolo had some sort of weird baby. Um, but it really is pretty unique in the world. And so this is an interesting expression. They definitely lean into a slightly more oxidative style of winemaking, which is making that color pretty clear. And yeah, Tom, I think that's a great point. It would be fun to taste this in a black glass. And I think if you don't see the color of this wine, I would be driven by that red fruit, but more than anything, I'd be driven by that aggressive mineral undertone, which is really pretty serious. To your question, David, and then I'll sort of work my way through. I haven't seen something with this kind of minerality in Central Otago, and one of the reasons I think is that Central Otago is it is really, really bright. and those grapes get a huge amount of sunlight. And so for me, almost always, even the Pinot Noir there is like on the super ripe end of the spectrum, almost leaning into like stewy. And they can push that a little bit further than I like. But most of the wines really are so sun kissed that it's hard to read a massive amount of minerality through the fruit that comes out of that. It's been my experience. I'm not saying that they don't have a beautiful mineral character, but I think that the fruit dominates the wines for the most part.
We have to keep moving because there are lots
Yeah.
of questions coming out right now, and we have two more wines to go.
All
So
right. Let's
we're
go.
we're I'm going to ask folks if you can stay for the happy half hour so that we can continue answering your questions. But one question I do want to answer is this technically a rosé? This is absolutely a rosé. I think Dipankar had the question. This is known as a rosado, and the process of making this wine is the way a rosé is made.
Skin contact, but not too much.
Yeah, yeah. So like a bleed off.
Just enough.
Yeah.
Hey, Filippo. Ciao.
But yeah,
Arrivederci.
yeah. So it is a classic of the region, and as David had mentioned about the minerality, David, you got that volcanic soil, you
Yeah.
think?
Oh yeah. I think so. All right, let's look at wine number five. I'll move quickly through the wine, but don't hesitate to throw some questions in there. Here, the wine is bright. It's bright ruby with a little sort of fuchsia in the rim. No rim variation. It's all pretty consistent to the rim. I think indicating a youthful wine. Some staining of those tears, but the tears are not super thick. So I think kind of moderate alcohol as far as I can tell, but a little bit of extraction on the nose. The wine is fresh. Like if there was one thing I could say about the quality of the fruit here, it's like bright cherry, raspberry, strawberry, maybe even a little bit of cranberry aspect, but it's all like fresh and just barely ripe. Maybe a hint of dried strawberry, but it's not a dried fruit wine and it's not an overripe wine, right? Um, it's really red fruit driven. Um, the color is darker than I would expect for the nose, but the nose takes me fully into that red fruit character. Non-fruit, there's like a bubblegum character that gives something away for some people, I think. Lifted, like really juicy, fruity character. It's like it draws itself, it really sort of lines up with the fruit and not in like a fruit bomb, California Cabernet way. Sorry, I hope I didn't give anything away, but this is not California Cabernet. It's not that kind of like rich, overt fruit. It's just kind of like a fresh fruit element with a little bit of an herbal background. Let's taste the wine. On the palate, super dry, a little more peppery, like a little black pepper character to the wine. And it's not driving the wine, but it's definitely it's got a dried spice character. It goes leaner and more tart on the palate. It's definitely not as aggressive with as I would have expected when I smelled it. Like the fruit really jumps out, but on the palate, it really has a like little bit of tannin, not aggressive tannin, bright acidity, moderate plus acidity. It's not high acidity. Alcohol's moderate. It's kind of right down the middle of the road. Um, but then it definitely has this really kind of beautiful high tone fruit character that comes in at the end. It's definitely floral as well. It has this really kind of cool violet rose petal character. I was made fun of when I was tasting a long time ago for saying potpourri, because what is potpourri is like it's just a bunch of dried stuff with perfume sprayed on it, which is not wrong, but it does have a little bit of that dried orange rose petal character. I really like it. No oak that I'm sensing on the wine. Maybe a big barrel, but it really kind of reads more like concrete or something along those lines.
Mm. Do you get that pepper that Kevin is mentioning here?
I don't get it on the nose. I get it on the palate, honestly. And I love black pepper. I'm a I'm a big Northern Rhone Syrah drinker, and so I love that character in a wine. Here I get it really on the palate as a kind of dried, like dried herb and just a little bit of like cracked black pepper character that I like. And I think it adds a nice characteristic to the wine, but it's not driving the wine at all.
I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit. If you have your six glass, pour both and you'll compare the colors. We've really gone
Oh
away
yeah.
from that orangey color of the rosé, and
Yeah.
both of these are just gorgeous, their color here.
Yeah. You notice you can see through one of them and you cannot see through the other. That should be a clue.
Hmm.
So wine number five, obviously we're not looking at a super thick-skinned grape variety or something that has a lot of extraction. Probably a thin-skinned grape variety. One other thing, I'm not going to dive too far down this rabbit hole, but it's kind of a monochromatic wine. There isn't a lot of color variation. A lot of red wines, you'll see variation where it gets when the depth decreases at the rim, there's color variation, and here it's actually like one tone of red throughout the whole thing.
Hmm.
So that's important. Cool.
All right, I'm going to show our choices here so that folks can guess. And I'm going to put the poll up. So hopefully, Lainey, you can see the poll now. Here are
Go.
your choices. We've got Barbera, Gamay, Grenache, and of course, in terms of regions, we have Italy, France, Australia, and California. So let's see where folks are headed towards. I don't know if David was putting his guess out there or suggesting that he was getting these
Or is
different.
that Northern Rhone is greater than Morgon?
Oh,
Is
I
that what
see.
that means?
Awesome. Great. I'm glad that lady you can see it.
Separate comments. Okay.
Okay. I see. Okay. All right, let's see where everybody else is thinking. I'm gonna close it early because we gotta leave space for the last wine. And I don't know if you guys saw, we did post on Instagram that one of the winemakers of these six wines will be joining us for the happy half hour. I believe that this person is already in the room. So it would be interesting if you can stay with us for the happy half hour, you'll get to meet this person. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and launch it. And here's where we are at. 65%
Awesome.
thought that it was Gamay, 25% in Grenache, and 10% in Barbera. I do think that that's a bit of work for you, David, to explain. And 75% think that it's France. So we're very firmly, so we can knock that one out of the park in the old world. But why is it not Italy? And why
Mm.
is it not California? Maybe we could start there.
So I think Barbera is actually a really good guess with this wine, just because the color is right on point for Barbera. I just think that it doesn't have. There's not that with Barbera. Most of what I'm getting right now, there's just a hint more volatile acidity. It's a little more bitter and tartar on the palate. Where this one, I think the fruit kind of carries through in a little bit sweeter and riper way. Um, I think Grenache, and I maybe was misleading when I said pepper, which I get, and I think it's in the wine. I just don't think it's driving the wine. And I think Grenache is a thin skin variety, which yeah, bingo, David. That's where I'm going. Grenache is a thin skin variety, which many people forget, and so it frequently will look like Pinot Noir in the glass. Even great great Grenache will frequently look very very light, but it's almost always going to be sitting much higher as far as the ABV. The alcohol is going to be higher, and it's just going to feel warmer and rounder and have a much broader texture. This is in fact Gamay, which takes it to France. There's a little bit of Gamay from California, and some of it's really good, but this is not, in fact, a California Gamay. The things that drive this to Gamay, the color, there's a little bit of carbonic in this wine. So whole cluster will, even if it's not a full-on carbonic maceration, but whole cluster will lead to some carbonic, which is leading me to that sort of lifted, high-toned red fruit character. It also changes the color of the wine, actually. The process of carbonic maceration limits the spectrum of red. Some dorky stuff for you all out there. So the fact that it's kind of this monochromatic fuchsia-ish red is not surprising. Um, but then on the palate, it's just like that beautiful mineral character. It's a really well-made wine, so it's definitely it's not a sort of simple nouveau, something along those lines. Not that they're all simple, but you know what I'm saying. That it's not a monochromatic wine. It really changes and evolves on the palate. It just doesn't have the weight for anything else. It's not as light and as red fruited as I would find with Pinot Noir. The structure doesn't quite make sense. Um, it really is, I think, a really beautiful representation of this is Julianas. So this is Cru Beaujolais, um, which is from Clos de Beef, which is lovely. I think they make a beautiful wine. It's not simple, right? This is not um, I think I don't, most Beaujolais right now that's coming in is honestly so much better than it ever has been. Like the wines are so good right now. But this wine I think is really exceptional and shows the complexity that we're getting out of Cru Beaujolais. And there's the beautiful vineyard. Um, but again, between the color, the structure, especially the alcohol level and the acidity levels, and then the way it kind of goes from a really bright, lifted red fruit character to a much more mineral palette, all makes me think it's Gamay.
Yeah. I love the vines. The vines here are gorgeous.
Hmm.
Why would this not be a whole cluster? It's and Thomas, it's funny because David and I discussed whether we should have put Pinot Noir as a pick, and that felt a little mean. But why is it not whole cluster Pinot to you, David?
It doesn't have the fruit for it. It just doesn't like. I think that Gamay, as much fruit as you might get, especially with a little bit of carbonic on the nose, on the palate, it becomes so much more of a mineral driven wine where Pinot Noir, even like when it's whole cluster and kind of all the stem inclusion and all kinds of other, even part, yeah, whole, with carbonic, you still end up with more alcohol and you end up with more fruit character in the wine.
Yeah. All right, wine number six. And like I said, there is a winemaker in the room, and it's the winemaker for wine number six.
So I better not
I'm gonna
say anything.
reveal. No, you're gonna say whatever you want to say. But I love that the winemaker is here and listening in. And I know that this person would want to hear what you guys think. So please don't hold back. Not that you've held back
Don't,
at all.
and never do. So, I mean, I happen to know what the wine is, but the wine, looking at the site, this is obviously super, super different. I mean, it is purple black in the glass with just a little bit of rim variation, but all of that leading me to conclude this is a youthful wine that is from a thick-skinned, deeply intensely colored grape variety, heavy staining. Absolutely right, David. Like this is, you can see, and with the color and with the staining, I'd expect a lot of alcohol potentially, and I would expect maybe some slower, sort of lugubrious tears, and I'm not seeing that as much. So I'm curious what it's going to read like from an alcohol perspective on the palate. But yeah, it is super densely colored. So on the nose, and this is another wine that I would encourage you to smell it, then swirl, then smell again, because I think that you get very different things from both techniques. And I think this is both black and red fruit. I really think the black fruit drives it, and it's ripe, but it is not dried, not jammy. It's just ripe. There's a little bit of like a blackberry like compote character to it, but almost blackberry liqueur. But again, I don't think that it's like an overripe characteristic. It's just kind of the focus of the fruit in that way.
Mhm.
Um, I don't get a strong presence of oak. I don't get an herbaceous character to the wine either. With a wine this color, I immediately am like, should I be looking for pyrazines, other pyrazines here? Am I getting any green bell pepper? I'm not seeing bell pepper or roasted red pepper or any of those characteristics. Um, I do get a little bay leaf, a little bit of tobacco,
Do you
but
get the
really I get
orange peel that Bill is talking about?
just a touch. Yeah, I don't disagree, and it kind of lends itself to the like that cassis character I was talking about before. Almost like a touch of that Amaro character. And David, yeah, with the color, I might look for blue fruit, and I also don't get it. I really think this is a black fruit with some red fruit, some dark um, red currant, um, blackberry character. Really, really drives the wine. Let's
Mm.
taste it. Yeah, I think on the palate, it really moves out of any of that red fruit characters. It really is deeply seated in black fruit. It's dry. The acidity is moderate to moderate plus. It's definitely present. Um, the alcohol is present, but it's also not. Um, it doesn't sit apart from the wine. It's not overpowering, and it doesn't read super alcoholic to me. Um, I get a bit more of a baked earth kind of I don't know, red earth characteristic to the wine that I wasn't getting as much on the nose, but I really on the palate I get a much more sort of mineral earth driven thing. There's some bay leaf. I get a little bit of a blood orange or orange zest character. I like that call. I got it more on the palate than I did on the nose, for sure. Still not an oak characteristic to the wine. I don't think it's like stainless steel. It's not austere in that way. It's not so tightly wound, but I don't get any oak presence that's driving the wine in any way, shape, or form. Which is surprising when you see a wine of this intensity. It's like the worst. It's the sommelier inclination to just immediately be like, I see a really dark red wine. There's oak, and I'm not getting that here.
You mean like oak that stakes out at you,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
an unbalanced oak? Mhm.
Exactly.
Mhm. I have the poll up if you are guessing
Um,
along. This is your last anonymous poll for the day. Let's see where people are at. I don't know. Is this wine difficult? I saw David's reference to the wine five and wine six being quite difficult for him yesterday. Um, I, I wonder, David Keck, if you think that this wine is fair for what it is.
oh yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you why shortly. I think wine number five is difficult only because, and this is I can't remember, maybe it was David or somebody else was saying that whole cluster or Sandy Pinot is leaning. I think that there's a lot of people making fun wines that can make the blind tasting of classics challenging. I think if
Mhm.
you're making classic Oregon, like making a whole cluster Pinot that you're picking early. And yeah, is that delicious? Potentially. Is it going to potentially confuse you with Beaujolais? Absolutely. Would I consider that a classic Oregon Pinot Noir? Not really. Like that's not what I would pull for somebody if they wanted to taste classic Oregon Pinot Noir. I just don't think it's a fair wine. You
Mhm.
can make you can make Gamay and you can make Gamay in a lot of different places. There's some beautiful Gamay in Oregon that I've had that's confusing, but it still tastes like it's from Oregon, not like it's from France, unless you really pick it early and do weird things. So
So I'm sharing the poll. We hit 90%. So
great.
37% are at Malbec, 47% are at Merlot, and 16% at Alicante Boucher. And in terms of region, most of you are in the New World. I mean, it's 89% between Argentina and Washington, with Washington edging out by 15%. and most people are not in Spain or Portugal. Probably that Alicante Boucher pickers were picking Portugal as well. So, what do you say before we show people where we're going?
Um, I think the color, yeah. Thanks, Jerry. It's pretty, yes, it can. Merlot as a blend can certainly have this intensity of color. If I see that color, I'm usually thinking Malbec or Syrah. Like those are the two black grapes in the world for me, in a classic sense. Those are the two that just make that intensity of color.
Mhm.
Um, Merlot with a lot of extraction and maybe a healthy dose of Cabernet in there can get pretty dark. And so I think if you're choosing Merlot, obviously it makes sense that you're choosing Washington but Washington Merlot is like 15.5% alcohol to start, right?
Yeah.
This does not have 16% alcohol. It doesn't have that intensity of fruitiness, but it also, at the end of the day, what makes this Malbec is that it's black. It's not 16%. And then it's about, for me anyway, it's about the things that it's not, right? When I see
Yeah.
that kind of color intensity, I don't get any pyrazines. The tannin is not Cabernet tannin. It's a little bit softer. It's a little kind of grittier in texture. It doesn't have the alcohol to be Merlot, um, or the fruitiness to be from Washington or somewhere else. Um, and and it has this weird element of being in a place that gets a decent amount of sunlight and at a pretty high elevation. So you're maintaining acidity from elevation, from some pretty windy climatic influences, and then you have the element of sunny, beautiful mountainous vineyards. So it really can't be anything else structurally, and everything else about the wine with respect to color and flavor profile sort of checks the rest of the boxes for me.
Hmm. So it's pretty
There's
textbook for you.
Oh, I think so. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, and I think that people love for Malbec, and I can't wait to actually, I'd really like to hear what Sebastian says about this, but I think that sommeliers really want Malbec to be more heavily oaked than it is, and more often than not, it is a very judicious use of oak and thoughtful use of oak in Argentina right now, and it's not driving the wines as much as we think it is.
Yeah.
So,
So yes, the winemaker Sebastian is on the call. I asked him to please not put his name as an attendee. So now that we've revealed you, if you put your name, I will be able to pull you up into a panelist. But here's the beautiful grounds of Zuccardi. Um, and of course, here we go.
and David, that's a great question, and I think we might want Sebastian to start. I have my own thoughts about it, but it has a lot to do with elevation.
Yeah, I think this is Sebastian. Made you a panelist, so if you can come on, that's great. Um, if not, I have a picture of him. Ah, there
There
you
he is.
are. How are you?
Very good,
Incognito.
very good.
Hola,
Hello,
Hola.
it's
Thank
me.
welcome.
you for joining
I'm the
us.
same. I'm the same.
So
Good picture too.
tell us more about this wine. You've heard what people thought it was a Merlot from Washington. Ah.
Okay, but one thing that is interesting is without any doubt a new dimension for Malbec because many years ago, Malbec was something very over extracted with a lot of quantity of oak and very overripe. When we started making this style of Malbec was completely different, the orientation. Our challenge was avoid overripe, avoid over extraction, and avoid oak. So like David explained, it's a wine that was fermented and aging in concrete. We cultivate in an area that is very close to the Andes mountain, and you can see in all the pictures, our landscape is in relationship with the Andes. So we make mountain wines. So this is a Malbec from the Andes mountain in high elevation, but also looking to avoid the the how to say that the wines talk in transparency and purity about the places. So you can see the quantity of stones that we have in Altamira. These two pictures are two of our vineyards in Altamira. Altamira is a place at 3,600 feet of altitude, very close to the mountain, in an area that is extremely rocky. And rocks are granite surrounded by a thick layer of calcare. So the place where we are cultivating is quite unique. And then the decision in the winery is avoid the use of oak and work completely in concrete.
Mm. And so are you, this is a picture of Altamira in Uco Valley.
Yes.
Great. And
The
how is
Uco,
Uco Valley different from the rest of Mendoza or special about it?
when I say mountain wines, it's because everything is in relationship with the mountain. The landscape, the climate conditions, the water that we use to irrigate, the soils, and we are mountain people. Everything that happens in our mind is in relationship with the mountain. When you talk about the Uco Valley, you are talking in my area, the highest altitude area in Mendoza. So it's the coldest place. When you think in cold place, in general, you think in relationship with the ocean. But we live in an area because the Andes mountain that is isolated from any ocean influence. So we live in a cold place, but with a very pure sunlight. So our wines talk about the freshness of the temperature, but the intensity of the light. I read in the comments someone that talk about blue fruit, and I agree. When we make our Malbec, we are not talking about black or red fruit. We are in the middle, in the blue fruit. And the other thing that the Uco Valley has, like a fingerprint, is that the origin of the soils were the Andes Mountain. And the Andes Mountain has a very complex geology. So something that is quite unique in our area is that you can find granite with calcare. And this is unique. This is impossible to find in another place. And in particular, Altamira, because the relationship with the mountain, the quantity of stones that we have in the area is huge. In order that you have an idea, one of the vineyards that I planted in Altamira, I took out 1,000 tracks with the stones to can plant the vineyard. Oh, so wow. Altamira is a south position in the Uco Valley, close to the mountain, very fresh, cold nights with a very stony soils. Our challenge is that you can feel all this in the wine through the freshness, the intensity, but also the texture of the tannins.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, Sebastian, I'm going to ask you to stay on for the happy half hour, and some of our guests will put themselves on video. Hopefully, guys, this is your cue to go get dressed if you're not dressed. And, and I'm going to go through our two remaining slides, and then we'll open up for questions directly to Sebastian. I just want to give David some props here. He's joined us at Master of the World for the first time, did the picks and all that good stuff. And David, from owning restaurants, as I said in the beginning, and honky tonks in Texas, now is making wine. Sebastian, in Vermont. Did you know that they made wines in Vermont?
I didn't know. Nice.
Yeah.
I have to visit him.
Yeah.
Please. So, we also have mountains.
Yeah.
Just a little different.
So I want to bring your attention to David's Stella 14 and have David talk a little bit about this before you log off. There's only a little bit of the 2022 vintage, and the 23 vintage was wiped out due to frost. So if you want to buy the 22 before the 24 is released, David, tell us more about Stella 14.
Sure. Yeah, so when Lauren and I we decided to move from Texas in February of 2020, which was an interesting time to leave hospitality. And then as we were driving, basically was when everything was starting to shut down. And we ended up here, and the vineyard that we are actually walking in there with our dogs, Pesto and Leaf, became available for lease and was 20 minutes from the house we were renting. So we started, and I'd studied wine for 20 years, but I'd never really picked up a pair of pruners. So so we took over that vineyard and bought a tractor, bought a sprayer, started pruning. It hadn't been pruned, and it was June, so we were basically pruning against the clock in the crazy middle of COVID, and made our first vintage of. They're all hybrid varieties, so all grape varieties that can survive winter here, because it drops to, I don't know, pretty consistently down to -20 or -30 Fahrenheit. So that is not super healthy for vinifera, but we grow hybrid varieties and make mostly sort of sparkling wines with beautiful high acidity and low alcohol. We make a little bit of still wine. That's actually what we have left from 2022. Growing Frontenac Blanc and Frontenac Noir and Marquette. And we make the wine in our barn here, and we make about 500 cases a year. And just planted, well, 500 cases now. We planted another 4.5 acres of vineyards last year, and took over 4 more acres that we're kind of nursing back to health. And yeah, it's been a crazy project.
If you've never had a Frontenac Blanc, you've got to try one from Vermont. And I'm hoping that Master of the World is going to be able to bottle one of your future vintages. Very exciting for us. And for those of you who have to leave, I want to tell you that next month we have Jimmy Smith. Jimmy Smith, I love Jimmy Smith. If you're a studier of WSET, and I'm saying this to Jerry out there, I've heard you. SAT tasting comes with the next month's tasting. It is going to be our grid, of course, but we're also going to co-present the SAT grid.